Welcome to Aristocards, featuring the finest in tabletop card gaming, and I'm your host, the Baron. Wizards of the Coast recently announced a new secret Lair drop series in the form of Extra Life 2020. This product does contain 4 cards reprinted that see varying levels of use within the Commander format. 3 of these cards include Teferi's Protection, Amulet of Vigor, and Collected Company. However, the 4th card that will serve as the premise for today's discussion is Consecrated Sphinx. For 4 blue, it is a 4/6 creature Sphinx. It has flying. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Now, this is indeed a popular card within the Commander format, seen on EDH Rec that it is included in about 7% of the decks, about 15,000. And the card currently goes for, on the secondary market, around $30 US. However, before you line up to purchase this secret Lair drop with the intention of adding a Consecrated Sphinx to your collection, I am here to present the case as to why Consecrated Sphinx, along with several other powerful creatures, should actually not be included in your Commander decks. The creatures we are discussing today shall meet the following criteria. These are creatures that are extremely powerful and potent in their utility. However, if their intention lacks the ability to remove at least 1 player from the table on the turn they come into play, they can be used against us to force our own demise. Now we shall analyze the Consecrated Sphinx. For 4 blue, so 6 CMC, you get a 4/6 flying creature, which is rather respectable. Now, the utility on the card does have significant potential. Whenever an opponent draws a card, we may draw 2 cards. Therefore, if we have 3 opponents and they each take their turns, they draw 1 card each, we shall draw 6 cards. And here is the crux of the argument. Your opponents are now going to take their turns, which will give them opportunities to leverage your Consecrated Sphinx against you. Essentially, it has the high probability to backfire. The first method available to your opponents is to simply take control of the creature. Of course, there are many options available in the format, such as auras that include control magic, or creatures such as the very popular Gilded Drake. What was once your significant card draw advantage now belongs to one of your opponents. The second method available to your opponents is to either clone it or copy it. Phyrexian Metamorph can enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, and Rite of Replication shall put a token onto the battlefield that is a copy of any target creature. This outcome is, quite frankly, the worst possible scenario. If your opponent draws a card, then you may draw 2 cards. Then if you draw 2 cards, the opponent with the Consecrated Sphinx may draw 2 cards for each card you drew. And then you can draw more cards, and then they can draw more cards, and back and forth, and this can go on for days. I've been at the table and seen this loop occur before, and it is an absolute nightmare. Your opponent can now stop drawing cards whenever they wish, and if they drew into their win condition before you, it is now lights out. The third method in which your Consecrated Sphinx could be used to your detriment is opponents that are playing with reanimate effects. So if your Consecrated Sphinx goes to the graveyard, they could use a rather cheap CMC card such as Animate Dead or Reanimate and now use it to their own benefit. Furthermore, with all of these options, these cost significantly less mana to cast than your Consecrated Sphinx did. You paid 6, and in some cases your opponents can pay as cheap as 1 mana in order to take advantage of it. If you insist upon including Consecrated Sphinx in your deck list, it must be accompanied with some form of protection. For example, the card Asceticism, which states that creatures you control have hexproof, and you can pay 1 and a green to regenerate target creature. If you have some type of combo to run off of the Consecrated Sphinx, such as the Temple Bell, which forces each player to draw a card, therefore, if you have 3 opponents, they draw 3 cards, and you may draw 6 cards and have significant advantage, then we shall also revise the previous statements. But if your intention is to play Consecrated Sphinx on the board, unprotected, no follow-up, and you're simply passing the turn, that is not effective Commander play. allow for us to review several more powerful creatures that I refuse to run in my EDH deck lists for grave concern they could be leveraged to my own demise. Edric, Spymaster of Trest. For 1 green-blue, it's a 2/2 legendary creature elf rogue. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. The motivation for not playing Edric heavily overlaps with the reasons cited for not using Consecrated Sphinx. Affording your opponents the potential to draw a card when one of their creatures damages an opponent that is not you is likely not going to be ending the game. However, if they are now drawing 2 cards for each creature that damages an opponent, that could significantly shift the balance of power away from yourself in the game. There are so many incredible options for card draw within the Simic colors that Edric now simply seems too risky. Nyx Bloom Ancient. For 4 green, it's a 5/5 enchantment creature elemental. It has trample. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. Again, yes, this is an extremely powerful ability, but the intention of playing a Nyx Bloom Ancient, especially if you are paying for its full mana cost, should be that you are going to leverage that ability to at least knock one opponent out of the game the turn it comes into play. If you tap out to play Nyx Bloom Ancient and expect you're going to be able to untap on your next turn and be using 3 times as much mana, then you are sorely mistaken. If you play it and pass the turn, and now the opponent to your left has a Phyrexian Metamorph in their hand, they can pay only 3 to have their very own Nyx Bloom Ancient, and likely you will now give them enough mana to play their own win conditions. I have seen this happen at the table more than once. These are nearly identical reasons for why I do not run this next card, Vornclex, Voice of Hunger. For 6 green, it's a 7/6 legendary creature Praetor. It has trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. It's already bad enough if your opponent creates a copy of Vornclex for themselves that you shall give them additional mana, but now their Vornclex will prevent you from untapping your own lands. And unless you are somehow cheating him into play, that 8 CMC mana cost is simply too prohibitive. The next card is Avacyn, Angel of Hope. For 5 white, it is an 8/8 legendary creature angel. It has flying, vigilance, and indestructible. Other permanents you control have indestructible. For 8 CMC, there are simply better options, cards which allow for you to win the game, not simply protect your board state. And if your opponent uses a control magic on Avacyn, now all their permanents are indestructible, including now the control magic they just enchanted her with. And with so many answers in the EDH format now exiling permanents instead of destroying them, Avacyn is simply slowly phasing out of relevance. Now at this point you might be asking the question, why Baron? What about the other powerful creatures in our format, such as Craterhoof Behemoth, or Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, or Eldrazi, such as Emrakul the Promised End? Are you suggesting that we should not be playing with these powerful creatures? And no, that is not what I am suggesting. Most players that do use these cards have figured out that you play them and then you are looking to either win the game on that turn or remove at least one opponent that is the most significant threat. They are mostly used properly, and yes, you should run them. When you play Craterhoof Behemoth, it is an attempt to overrun all of your opponents with damage. If you're playing Razaketh, well, likely you're reanimating him and not paying his full CMC, but usually when Razaketh comes into play, that player is going to tutor for a game-winning card. Or Emrakul the Promised End will allow you to take control of one player's entire turn. But again, the strategy for these cards is not play and pass. They are a precursor to a win condition. And now the time has come for your thoughts, commoners, as I have 2 questions for you today. Question the first, do you plan to procure the new Secret Lair Extra Life Edition? And 2, are there any other creatures out there you know of that potentially could be too powerful based on the criteria cited today for your EDH deck lists? 1,000 thank yous for watching. Please do make sure to like that video, it helps ever so much, and share this video with your Commander playgroups. Until next time, cheers!